online here this Tuesday at Classic Country, AM 1450. Jim Bresnahan now joined by Chris Graham of the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online here to update the Virginia sports scene. And before we talk about a little college and high school basketball, let's go back a couple of days, Chris, to the Super Bowl. Sunday night, Pittsburgh gave it a good comeback, almost came back from a huge 18-point deficit, got within 3 points, but Green Bay able to hang on to the Super Bowl victory, winning Super Bowl 45 Sunday by a total of 6 points. How about your thoughts on how the game developed?
Well, it went according to the way a lot of the experts said it would go. Green Bay, despite being the 6th seed in the NFC playoffs, came in as a pretty solid favorite in this game against the number 2 seed in the AFC. And I think it was just the matchup of the two teams. The Steelers, of course, with their solid run defense, but the Packers didn't even seem to want to try to run. Late in the game, they'd still only run the ball 9 times. I think they ran it 3 or 4 times late as they were trying to run the clock down. But, you know, less than 15 carries in that game for Green Bay. They threw a lot, and they didn't even try to go into the teeth of that Steelers front 7. And as a result, you know, they took advantage of maybe some issues back in the secondary. Of course, they're talking about Troy Polamalu maybe having played through an injury in that game. And on the other side of the ball, Pittsburgh seemed to have issues. You know, they had 3 turnovers. 3 turnovers in a Super Bowl game where the other team has none and you lose a game by less than a score. That tells you right there the margin for error was not much. And Pittsburgh's game plan, you know, they moved the ball up and down the field. They just couldn't keep the ball in their hands enough. And so Green Bay gets the big win, really led the whole way and held it off at the end. At least it was a good game. And as far as that goes, at least the game was still a close game at the end. Pittsburgh still had a chance in the last couple of minutes. The advertisers got their full value. The NFL got full viewership, record viewership as far as that goes on TV this year. And so good game all around. I think the fans were probably pretty happy. The NFL's happy, and Green Bay fans certainly happy.
It'll be interesting to see. I know Aaron Rodgers was talking about his next goal, obviously, is to repeat. And he said maybe not everybody will be back with his team, but we should have the quarterback for the season. Of course, if labor talks go okay, and they do play next season. But, you know, a few of the Packer receivers, and Jones is the one who really stands out, dropping some passes that were short touchdowns. So maybe right before halftime against the Bears, dropping a short touchdown pass against the Steelers. I mean, it's not a turnover, but when you drop a touchdown pass, a potential touchdown pass, it's kind of like a turnover. Makes you just wonder, if indeed we do see football next fall, how many of the Packers might be back?
I think that they'll keep their core. You know, there were some drop passes, but also those same guys dropping passes were making some good catches too. Aaron Rodgers had the game of his life. I mean, he's had a pretty good career so far, a young career so far. But even the passes that were incompletions, of course, not even just the drops. He was on target a good bit as far as the game goes. So you know, he really stepped up in his realm. He's certainly among the elite now in the NFL, not with a Super Bowl win and the way he did it, MVP performance, and that kind of thing. And yeah, you know, you'll always want to go out and make your team better. But I think that Green Bay team, the core of that team, not just on offense with Aaron Rodgers and some of those receivers, but the defense, Clay Matthews, and of course just the 3-4 scheme that they used with Dom Capers. That 3-4 scheme had been in vogue, you know, several years ago. More and more teams were using it. Now you see a lot of teams going in a different direction with their defenses. But Green Bay runs that 3-4 well. The 3-4 with the zone blitz scheme, where they drop, you know, they can drop linemen back into coverage and blitz linebackers and corners, and you know, Charles Woodson back in the backfield when he was in the game in the first couple of quarters, and then other corners were blitzing. It's just so hard to pick up where the pressure is going to come from, where the coverage is going to be, and the way they run it perfectly. So I think that Green Bay team, you know, barring significant injuries to someone like either a Clay Matthews or an Aaron Rodgers, is going to be a formidable team for the next few years.
Yeah, we have seen, especially in the NFC, how tough it is to repeat as NFC champions, let alone as Super Bowl champions.
Yeah, 10 NFC champions in the last 10 years, 10 different NFC champions in the last 10 years. So what that tells you is, yeah, that there's an awful lot of parity in the NFC. And, you know, in the AFC, you've seen a couple of teams, New England and Pittsburgh, dominate. And actually, I guess you could certainly add Indianapolis to that mix. You know, just thinking about Pittsburgh, you talk about a core group being back. I mean, this is pretty much the same team in a lot of ways, at least the leaders of this team, as won that Super Bowl, what was it, 6 years ago now, when that current Steelers group of Ben Roethlisberger and Hines Ward and Antoine Randall L., James Ferrier, James Harrison, Troy Polamalu, all those guys are the key guys who've been in 3 Super Bowls now in the last 6 years, won 2 of them. And so the AFC is a very top-heavy conference, but the NFC is a very wide-open conference. And who's to say that's not going to be the case again next year? Again, if they do play next year.
Hey, switching gears really quick, college basketball, tough losses for the Virginia teams in the ACC this past weekend with Virginia Tech losing at Boston College. And boy, I'll tell you, I was listening to that UVA Miami game. They had a pretty decent lead with less than a minute to go, and apparently fouled Miami on a couple of three-point attempts, which didn't make much sense, and ended up going to overtime and losing that game, and that was a loss that really hurt the Cavs.
Well, and of course the attention is on the missed three-pointer, the foul on the three-point shooters. Also, Miami made a three-point shot in that last minute. Virginia missing a couple of the front ends of 1-and-1s, a turnover. Mustafa Farrakhan, an 80% foul shooter going into the game, goes 4 for 9 from the foul line. The team goes 9 for 22 in a game they lose in overtime. They lost a 7-point lead in the last minute, and that's tough to do. So how many times have you watched games where you see that kind of a margin and the teams foul and end up losing by 10 or 12 points? Instead, things go Miami's way, and Miami gets a break. They've had a tough season this year, a troubling season this year with close losses, and they finally get one at the end instead of losing it at the end. But Virginia, for them, the bugaboo continues. This is a team that had such a great start, 8-3 start with wins over Minnesota and Virginia Tech, and they've gone 4-8 since. And it's not just losing Mike Scott that's the key to that. They started struggling before Mike Scott left. But now they're really searching for their identity. They lose a player last week, Billy Barron, one of their heralded recruits. Didn't get a lot of playing time after the first couple of games where he scored 19 and 14. And he's headed back home. He's a guy from Rhode Island. His dad, Jim Barron, is the coach up there, and he's going back to play for his dad. So things are starting to unravel, to say the least, for the Cavs. And on the other side, Virginia Tech, that was a big loss for Virginia Tech at Boston College. Virginia Tech's still in the mix for an NCAA bid. And that loss on the road up there at BC against a team that had lost 4 of its last 5 and had gotten blown out at home by North Carolina earlier in the week, that's a troubling loss for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, Boston College is in that group 5 or 6. It all depends on whether you want to stick Miami in that group, but it's that group, that middle tier in the ACC, where you just wonder how many, depends on how many victories each team gets down the stretch. But I mean, you just wonder out of that middle tier, how many teams will make it into the NCAA? Oh yeah,
and so Virginia Tech losing that game falls back into that pack. A win in that game, they're at 6-3, and they're sort of on the top of the heap, sort of looking down. But at 5-4 now in the conference, that they're tied with BC. There's a big huddle right there in that middle. And unlike BC, they can say, hey, we got to win over Virginia Tech. If you're Florida State, we got to win over Duke. Virginia Tech doesn't have a marquee win yet. They've got some losses that are not very good either.
I'm not sure, for like teams like Boston College or Florida State or Maryland or some of the other teams that are in that middle tier, what their non-conference situation looks like as far as big wins back in November and December, but I'm not sure Virginia Tech can really claim any big wins out of conference.
They can't. The big thing that Virginia Tech can claim out of conference is, well, we try to play a tough schedule, but they lost those key games. They lost to Kansas State, who is now final in the top 25. They lost to UNLV. So you can't go say, well, we lost to a bunch of good teams. You have to have some wins over some good teams, and so that puts paramount importance on future games with, say, Duke or North Carolina. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at their schedule to see even if they have any more of those kind of games left, in which case it puts pressure on them in Greensboro in March, because they'll have to, at least run to the final, you'd have to think, if they can't get a marquee win in a regular season, because I think that's just how close this is. They don't have a marquee win either in conference or out of conference. They've got a decent record and a decent RPI, but they're not going to get rewarded for playing a bunch of games and losing them. They have to go out and win one, and they haven't done that yet, and at least in an impressive way against a quality opponent.
Yeah, you get the feeling right now the Hokies, unless they have a 4, 5, 6 game winning streak in the latter stages of the regular season, they're going to at least have to get to the conference finals, and as you mentioned, maybe the conference championship game.
I think so. And of course, getting to the conference championship game, it could be a tough one too. If they're not in the top 4 in the conference, they have to play on Thursday, and so that's an extra game they'd have to play. And they're certainly in that mix right now too. So this is to me, and I'm not hearing anybody around the Tech program saying this out loud, but I'm looking at this. This could be a make or break year for Seth Greenberg. Seth Greenberg has been there for, I think this is his 9th or 10th season, and they've been to one NCAA tournament. Now, when he took over the program, this was not a program that anybody expected to go, consecutive years to NCAA tournaments, several years in a row, that kind of thing. But he's built up those expectations. He had that year in 2006, 2007 where they had a pretty solid run and got into the second round of the NCAA tournament. They've been knocking on the door for a few years now where, at least 2 or 3 years, they should have gotten, in a lot of people's minds, an NCAA bid where maybe the last team left out or one of the last 3 or 4 teams left out. But at some point, You got to get in. You got to start winning games in postseason play. And I wonder if, another year where if Virginia Tech doesn't get in the NCAA tournament this year, if people start saying, if certainly people in the program start saying, you know what, he got us to a good level. We can't get over the hump with him. Maybe we need to make another change. It might be the case. So, that's far off down the road relatively in the context of what Virginia Tech has to do this season. But I still wonder if this could not be that kind of season for Seth Greenberg if he doesn't get in with this team, a team that was predicted to be either 2 or 3 in the ACC, and certainly a lot of people thought would be almost a lock for an NCAA tournament bid. That this couldn't be a make or break season for him.
Before we wrap things up with high school basketball, how about VMI and JMU? JMU continues to stumble after a great start, and for VMI in the Big South, right now the Big South, the team to beat obviously is Coastal Carolina, but it all comes down to that conference tournament.
It does. It always does. And Coastal, of course, is on that hot streak. I think they won 20 in a row. Maybe it's more than that now. So Coastal is doing, kind of what Winthrop did for a while in the Big South a few years ago. This year, at least, they're doing it. But yeah, it always comes down to the conference tournament in the Big South. I mean, a lot of us who watch the Big South regularly and see how they do in non-conference play know that, the conference is a lot better than it had been in years past, but still they're not going to get 2 teams in a tournament. For JMU, it's interesting to see JMU. They won that long winning streak. I think they had a 9-game winning streak, starting to get votes in the top 25 in the AP poll, and they've completely imploded since then. They've really fallen back in the pack, to say the least, in the CAA. The CAA is tough. I mean, George Mason is now on a long winning streak. I got to see them beat ODU on TV the other day, and they looked really impressive in doing so. You got VCU playing good basketball. You got a conference, of course. You got the teams out of the state. Hofstra's playing really good right now. So it's a tough conference. There's not a lot of easy games in that conference, to say the least. But that said, JMU had put themselves in a position maybe a few weeks ago where they were in that mix of being one of those CAA teams that could be talked about as, maybe being able to qualify for a bid. If you don't win the conference tournament, get the automatic bid, maybe one of those at-large bids could go to a CAA team. Maybe it could have been JMU. They're certainly in a position now where they've got to win 3 games or maybe 4 in March and get their way in the tournament that way. There's no way they're going to get any consideration for an at-large bid. So it's, kind of disappointing to see. They had played so well there, but maybe they peaked too early. I don't know. I don't know what the situation was there.
And lastly, high school basketball, again, Robert E. Lee just continues to roll along. Fonnie Lehman, the team to beat right now, the Southern Valley District, with Rockridge second. I think they still have to go to Waynesboro. Waynesboro's right behind the Wildcats in 3rd place. And I was telling somebody the other day, Lee's been the dominant team, obviously. They've beaten the Wildcats here at Rockridge County twice. They could easily beat them in the district. They could beat them in the regionals. It'd be 4-0 against the Wildcats. And still, it could be the Wildcats who could win the championship by slipping by, say, Lee in the state semifinals, or maybe somebody else beats Lee and they don't have to face them. The Wildcats could go 0-4 against Robert E. Lee this season, and still, somehow, the way the high school basketball tournament is run, still somehow win the state championship. That's right.
It only matters if you win the last one. It doesn't matter how many you do during the season. And, you see that sometimes in college ball, too, where conference teams will match up and play close, maybe 2 close regular season games. They'll lose, one or the other will win that a matchup in the conference tournament, and then the other team goes further in the NCAA tournament. So it can happen there, too. But, Lee, as dominant as they've been, that was a heartbreaking loss for Waynesboro against them the other night. They were down 1 with a few seconds left. A lot of people in the gym thought that the controversial call, it went against Waynesboro, a pass that looked like it went off the Lee player, clearly out of bounds, didn't go Waynesboro's way, and then they had to foul late, and Lee held on for the win. But Waynesboro's been close. They lost a close one to Rockridge. They've now lost that close one to Lee. And that's the kind of thing, you look at a Lee team with that unbeaten record, and then Waynesboro and Rockridge obviously have lost to Lee in those matchups. But it's not like Lee beat them by 30 or 40 points. At least.
Yeah, Lee's the team to beat right now, but I don't think there's a whole lot of space between these 3 teams.
Yeah, there's not. The margin for error is not a lot. You say they get an injury, that a guy gets nicked up and isn't 100% or not able to play. Somebody gets in foul trouble during a game. In one of these postseason games. I think the margin for error is still pretty slim, even though Lee has won those games. It's still pretty small margin for error. So I think that even though Lee is the team that's sitting on top right now, that any of those 3 teams, and I think all those 3 teams are capable of going to the states and winning the states this year. It's just a matter of who will be hot at the right time of year.
Okay, Chris, what do we look for in the coming days from the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online?
We'll see what we can do to keep up with college basketball particularly. Virginia Sports Online is doing a lot to keep up with the CAA and the ACC, and there's plenty going on both in men's and women's basketball, especially that CAA. There's so many of the state teams are at the top of that conference there, especially as we head into the stretch here. So, we'll also keep up with Virginia Tech and Virginia and see how they, both teams seem to be limping towards the end of the season, but we'll see how they do as well.
And again, college baseball just around the corner.
That's right. Some of the D3 teams, I know EMU's already played some games. Eastern Maronite's already played some games. So, but I know that Virginia starts out, I believe it's a couple weeks. I'm not sure. Yes, it's the 25th and 26th. I'll be in maybe a cold stadium over at Davenport Field watching them play ECU. East Carolina's coming into town. So, it's hard to believe it's February and we're only a couple weeks away from the start of college baseball, but that's where we are.
Chris Graham with the Augusta Free Press and Virginia Sports Online talking about high school and college basketball for the most part here on this Tuesday. And we'll come back for more of Online here on Classic Country, AM 1450, right after this.